Sue and Johnsy were two young women who lived together in a small apartment in Greenwich Village. They were both artists and had a small studio where they worked on their art. Johnsy became inspired by an ivy vine that grew outside their window. She spent hours staring at the vine and sketching its leaves. As the days passed, the weather turned colder, and Johnsy became ill with pneumonia. Sue took care of her, but Johnsy's condition worsened. She would lie in her bed without moving, just gazing out of the window. Sue, her friend, became very worried. She sent for the doctor. Although he came every day, there was no change in Johnsy's condition. One day, the doctor took Sue aside and asked her, "Is anything worrying Johnsy?" "No," replied Sue. "But why do you ask?" The doctor said, "Johnsy, it seems, has made up her mind that she is not going to get well. If she doesn't want to live, the medication will not help her." Sue tried her best to make Johnsy take an interest in things around her. She talked about clothes and fashion, but Johnsy did not respond. Johnsy continued to lie still on her bed. Sue brought her drawing board into Johnsy's room and started painting. To take Johnsy's mind off her illness, she whistled while working. Suddenly, Sue heard Johnsy whisper something. She quickly rushed to the bed and heard Johnsy counting backwards. She was looking out of the window and was saying, 12. After some time, she whispered, 11, then 10, then 9, 8, 7. Sue anxiously looked out of the window. She saw an old ivy creeper climbing halfway up the brick wall opposite their window. In the strong wind outside, the creeper was shedding its leaves. Sue asked, "What's wrong, dear?" Johnsy whispered, 6. The leaves are falling faster now. 3 days ago, there were almost 100 leaves. There are only 5 left now. Sue tried to console her friend. "It's autumn, Johnsy. The leaves will fall." Johnsy replied, "When the last leaf falls, I will die. I have known this for the last 3 days." Sue shook her head. "Don't be ridiculous. The leaves falling from the ivy outside have nothing to do with your health. The doctor is confident that you will get better." Johnsy remained silent, while Sue went to get a bowl of soup for her. Upon receiving the soup, Johnsy declined and stated, "I don't want any soup. I am not hungry. Now there are only 4 leaves left. I want to see the last one fall before it gets dark. Then I will sleep forever." Sue sat down next to Johnsy on her bed, kissed her gently, and reassured her, "You are not going to die. I need the light to finish my painting and earn some money for us. Please, my dear friend, promise me that you won't look out of the window while I paint." Johnsy agreed, "All right. Finish your painting soon, for I want to see the last leaf fall. I am tired of waiting. I have to go away peacefully, like one of those poor, tired leaves." "Try to sleep," said Sue. "I have to paint an old miner. I will call Berman up to be my model." Sue paced back and forth in her small apartment, her mind racing with worry. She had never seen her friend Johnsy so sick before. Johnsy was convinced that she would die when the last leaf fell from the ivy vine outside her window, and Sue had tried everything to convince her otherwise. But nothing seemed to work, and now Johnsy was running a high fever and refusing to eat or drink. Sue knew she had to do something before it was too late. Desperate for help, Sue rushed down to the ground floor to find Berman, a 60-year-old painter who lived below her. She burst into his apartment, barely able to catch her breath. "Berman," she cried, "I need your help. Johnsy is sick, and I don't know what to do." Berman looked up from his work, a paintbrush in his hand. He had always admired Sue's passion for her art, even if he didn't always understand it. But he could see the worry etched on her face, and he knew he had to help. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, concern creasing his weathered face. "She's convinced she's going to die when the last leaf falls," Sue replied, her voice trembling. "I've tried everything, but I can't seem to get through to her. And now she's running a fever, and won't eat or drink." Brumman shook his head in disbelief. "Is she stupid?" he muttered. "How can she be so foolish?" Sue bristled at the words, but she knew Brumman didn't mean them the way they sounded. "She's just scared," she said softly. "And I don't know how to help her." Brumman nodded thoughtfully. "I'll come with you and see her," he said. "Maybe I can help." With bated breath, Sue and Brumman crept into Johnsy's room, trying not to wake her from her feverish sleep. They paused for a moment to look at her, and Sue's heart sank at the sight of her friend's frail body. She drew the curtains closed, blocking out the storm raging outside, and led Brumman to the next room. Peering through the window, Sue's heart skipped a beat at the sight of the ivy creeper clinging desperately to the side of the building. Only one leaf remained, battered by the relentless rain and wind. It trembled on the brink of falling, and Sue knew that if it did, Johnsy's fragile spirit would break with it. "It's going to fall," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the leaf. "I know it is." Brumman said nothing, his face grave with worry. He knew that Johnsy's life hung in the balance, and he cursed himself for never having painted that masterpiece he had always dreamed of. Without a word, he turned and walked back to his own room, a sense of failure weighing heavily on his shoulders. He knew that he had to find a way to help Johnsy, but he had no idea how. And as he sat alone in his room, listening to the storm rage outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The next morning, Johnsy's eyes fluttered open, and she turned to Sue with a weak voice. "Please draw the curtains," she whispered. Sue's heart raced as she approached the window, dreading what she might see. But as she drew back the curtains, she let out a gasp of relief. "Oh, thank God," she exclaimed. "There's still one leaf on the vine creeper. It's still green and healthy, even after the storm." Johnsy let out a sigh of disappointment. "I heard the wind last night," she said. "I thought for sure it would fall. But it's just delaying the inevitable. It's going to fall today, and then I'll die." Sue's heart sank at her friend's words. "No, Johnsy," she said, her voice firm with determination. "You can't give up. You have to fight. You have to live for your friends. What would happen to me if you die? I need you, Johnsy." But Johnsy just shook her head, her eyes fixed on the last remaining leaf. "It's pointless," she said, her voice barely audible. "I know what's coming, and I'm ready for it." Johnsy's weak smile faded as she closed her eyes, lost in thought. Despite her determination to give up, a small part of her couldn't help but cling to hope. Every hour or so, she would peek out the window and see the leaf still there, stubbornly clinging to the vine creeper. As the day wore on, Johnsy's eyes never strayed from the window, even as another storm raged outside. The wind howled, and the rain battered against the glass, but still the leaf held on. Hours passed, and the darkness outside deepened. Johnsy lay in silence, her eyes fixed on the leaf, until she finally summoned the strength to call out to Sue. "Sue," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been a terrible burden on you," she cried. "You have cared for me with such tenderness, and I have repaid you with nothing but misery. The darkness in my heart has consumed me. I've been thinking about the leaf. It's still there. After all this time, it's still holding on. Maybe there's something to that. Maybe I shouldn't give up just yet. Sue took her friend's hand and squeezed it gently. You are not a burden, Johnsy. You are my dearest friend, and I love you. But you must not give up on life. The last leaf on the vine outside our window has taught me that. Johnsy looked up at Sue, hope glimmering in her eyes. You mean, there is still a chance for me? Yes, my dear, Sue replied. The last leaf has shown us that even when all seems lost, there is still hope. We must fight to live, even when life seems too hard to bear. Johnsy nodded, determination etched on her face. You are right, Sue. I will fight. I will not give up. Sue made a cup of hot soup and brought it back to Johnsy's bedside. She then handed her friend a mirror and a comb. Johnsy smiled at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes shining with happiness. Thank you, Sue. You have given me back my will to live. Later that day, the doctor arrived to check on Johnsy. After examining her, he turned to Sue with a smile. Your friend has turned a corner. She now has the will to live, and I am confident she will recover soon. But the doctor's expression changed when he spoke of Brumnan. I am sorry to say that there is no hope for him. He is also suffering from pneumonia, and I fear he will not recover. The next morning, the sky was grey and heavy with gloom, as Sue stepped into Johnsy's room. Her heart felt heavy with the weight of the news she had to share. She approached Johnsy's bed and clasped her trembling hand in hers. My dear, Sue said softly, there's something I must tell you. It's about Mr. Brumnan. Johnsy's eyes widened with concern as she looked up at Sue. What is it? Is he okay? Sue's voice faltered as she spoke the words that would shatter Johnsy's fragile hope. No, my dear. Mr. Brumnan died this morning. Johnsy gasped, and tears filled her eyes. What? No. It can't be. Sue shook her head sadly. It's true. He was only sick for 2 days. The janitor found him on his bed, soaked to the bone and shivering. He'd been out in the storm all night. A heavy silence settled over the room, as the weight of Mr. Brumnan's loss hung heavy in the air. Sue and Johnsy clung to each other, mourning the loss of a man who had touched their lives in so many ways. Sue's voice trembled as she spoke the words that revealed the truth about Mr. Brumnan's final hours. They found a ladder and a lantern still lit, lying near his bed, and there were brushes and paints on the floor, green and yellow, scattered around the ladder. Johnsy's eyes widened with shock as she absorbed this information. What was he doing? Sue took a deep breath before continuing. He was painting, my dear. And do you know what he was painting? Brumnan's masterpiece. The ivy leaf outside your window, that doesn't flutter when the wind blows. He painted it the night the last leaf fell. Johnsy's heart ached with the weight of this revelation. But why? Why would he do that? Sue's eyes filled with tears as she spoke of the selfless act that had led to Mr. Brumnan's untimely demise. He did it for you, Johnsy. He knew how much that leaf meant to you, and he wanted to give you hope, even when he had none himself. The room fell silent as the magnitude of Mr. Brumnan's sacrifice settled over them. Sue and Johnsy both knew that they would never forget the man who had given everything for the sake of art and friendship. If you enjoyed watching this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, RK's English Language Learning, for more interesting stories.